Hello, and welcome to the Rubber Duck Dev Show. I'm Chris.
I'm Kristen.
I'm Amir.
And today we are going to talk about Ruby game dev. I'm really excited about this because you guys know that I do the Coding with Chris on Tuesdays live, and that's what I'm doing is Ruby game dev with DragonRuby. So I'm really excited to talk to Amir. Thanks for being here.
Happy to be here.
So we're gonna have a lot of fun chatting today. But before we get started, we do our week in review. So Kristen, how was your week?
Super busy like usual and struggling to come up with, gee, what could I talk about? Well, I'll talk about the most recent frustration that happened right before I got on for the show. And that is, you know how a lot of people use Ruby version managers or JavaScript version manager or Node version managers for, different projects. A lot of times you use them in development, and you can use them on the server as well. So like I personally, if I setting up servers to run Rails, I'm using RBenv, RBenv to determine what Ruby version is running on the server. Now, I also have used Elixir and Phoenix. So that's Phoenix is the web framework for Elixir. And of course, RBenv doesn't work in that environment, but there's this tool called ASDF. So someone very cleverly said ASDF, like the keys on the keyboard. And with that, you can specify your it does more than just one language. So it does Erlang and Elixir and Node.js. So you can specify all those versions in ASDF. And it works similarly. Well, I had another project that was using locally NVM, so the Node version manager for managing stuff. So I said, okay, I'll use this on the server. So far, no bueno, because it works differently than RVM than ASDF does. Like you can specify a file in the root directory of what you're working on, and once you deploy it, that tool looks for the file to determine the version. So like you can do Ruby-version for RVM. Well, even though they have a file that looks like it might work similarly called NVMRC, if you change that file, it doesn't change the version. You literally have to run a command after that to change the version. And I think what it's doing behind the scenes again, I just got on the call after dealing with some of this, is that it's using environmental variables to set what the current version is. So that makes it a lot more difficult to deal with, or at least definitely you have to handle it in a different way on a server. So I'm just like, so at this point, I'm kind of like, should we just install the version or should we use ASDF? So anyway, so a little bit of a struggle with that. So if you plan on using NVM the way you use other things, be forewarned.
Yeah.
Anyway, so
nice.
That's something I've been dealing with. What about you, Chris?
I got our first steps into GraphQL at work deployed yesterday, so that's good.
Yay.
That's all working well, and it was actually far easier to implement than I had anticipated, and was far more efficient than the REST APIs. So I was really happy with the outcome of that little experiment. We dropped one of our APIs, our internal API calls, from about 20 seconds with the REST down to about 1 second with the GraphQL, because they were able to limit what they were pulling, and didn't have to pull all the stuff. So that was a huge win. Also made some good progress on Coding with Chris on the Cave Lords project. Got some where I'm working with the DragonRuby. Got a bunch of tests working, got the view stuff extracted from deep in the classes and out to the top level stuff, so that we're not trying to do views rendering things all in the fun logic, which is nice. So a lot of good stuff going on there. Having more and more fun with that project the more I'm digging into it. So it's just right up my alley, Ruby and games. What's better than that? How about you, Amir? How was your week?
Happy to hear. So week. Two main things that I'll call it studying, because I can use that word. I did some studying on Assassin's Creed, Unity, and Returnal. So those were my two projects that I just want to see how they play, make sure I understand it, because I have to do game dev and it's got to be a tax deduction. So to make documents that I've done the studying against those. But I ended up finally beating Returnal, and that's a really difficult game.
Oh, I can imagine.
Hard. It was brutal. It was brutal. But it was beautiful. The narrative was like really nice. They did a good job of like, it's a roguelike, so it's completely random generated. But they
Love that.
have a storyline, a narrative storyline, and a narrative thread that's continuous. So the way they kind of like merge those things together with, how do you take random generated levels but have a sequential like or a linear story? They did a really good job with that, and I think it was super unique with respect to it. So really happy about just it was a great game. I wouldn't recommend
awesome.
playing it twice though. You get it once and you're like, I'm done. Thank you.
Yeah, that's too exhausting to do it multiple times.
Yeah, it was brutal.
Man, and it must just suck to have to play games for tax deductions too.
So difficult.
Oh man, I'm all jealous. But anyway, we really appreciate you being here, taking time to come join us. And chat, we are grateful for you being here too. Feel free to chime in, ask questions, say hi. We will pay attention to you, I promise. But anyway, I'm gonna ask you all the questions that I'm sure you've never ever heard before.
First time.
Yeah. Always. And dig into this. But there are some things that I'm curious about, and I haven't been able to find answers to them. So I figured, let's just go direct to the source. But the first obvious thing is there's Unity out there, which is like the primary intro to game dev environment. Mm-hmm. And there is, if somebody was interested in Ruby game dev, there's Gosu. Oh, am I too loud, Marco? I can fix that.
Let me see. How's my mic volume now?
Oh, that's a little better. Thank you.
A little better? Yeah.
Levi. All right. Hey, Levi. Welcome. All right. Chat, welcome. Let us know if one of us needs adjusting. I can make those adjustments. But anyway, so, if you're looking at Ruby game dev, you look it up, and the 800-pound gorilla there is Gosu. So, those things were there, pretty established. Why DragonRuby?
Why DragonRuby? Yep, it's a great question. So, with respect to Unity versus anything else, let's just say that. For me, it came down to a focus of indie game devs, and kind of my entire journey as like a solo dev with some collaborations with composers or whatnot. And in that, it's a really interesting problem domain when you think about what does a game engine look like for an indie game dev, for a small team, not a AAA studio, but 3 or 4 guys people that want to build something and release it, and hopefully make some sustainable income. And Unity doesn't provide that. It doesn't. You think about cross-platform needs. I want something that's cross-platform and just works. No platform-specific stuff, because I don't have the resource. I don't have the capital. I'm one guy. I don't have. Yeah. I can't throw money at the problem, and I can't throw people at the problem. So it's got to work, and I can't spend the time to deal with a lot of these issues that come with engines that aren't specifically tuned to say cross-platform deployment on current day and age platforms. How do we streamline that? So a couple of things that we streamline, you get a 16:9 aspect ratio by default, right?
Mhm.
It's 720p because you need 720p for the Nintendo Switch and handheld mode, and it scales up to I think we have up to 4K right now. So it handles the auto scaling, and it's something you don't have to worry about. You have the resolution 16:9:1. Sorry, but that's kind of what you start with, and then the publishing process and the deployment process are all in that same air and facet. I don't have the time to try to figure out how to do cross compilation. It just has
Mhm.
to work. And so that's one of the key differentiators. Another thing is that we wanted to tune it to 2D games. I think 3D games is possible for a small team. You got to have the experience though. It's a big ask.
Mhm.
It's a lot of work. So there's a lot of challenges there. And then with respect to Gosu, I have to be able to release platform, PC, Mac, Linux, console, specifically the Nintendo Switch, and web also. So
Mhm.
I have to be able to release to those platforms, and if I can't do that, then I'm SOL with respect to engines. And so Goshu is primarily CRuby, and while you can say that CRuby runs on PC, Mac, Linux, you can't say it runs on console because you don't have access to the file system like you do on PC, Mac, Linux. So CRuby assumes that you're running on an operating system that has standard lib, and
Mm.
you might not have that. You might not have that where you're deploying. So we need to create a kind of like a quasi embedded environment that lets us abstract out the external dependencies and swap them out within the runtime. And to tease that out of CRuby, it was just it's difficult. It was difficult.
Okay.
It was really, really tough to do. But
That
yeah.
makes
Did you try doing anything in Gosu and that's where you encountered these issues, or you never even tried? I'm just curious.
I'm familiar with Goshu and the APIs that are there. I think they're very standard APIs with what you would expect from a game engine. And from that perspective, it was. And I've watched quite a few of the videos that were out there. There was a specific topic I think was given at RubyConf where I think one of the main developers gave at RubyConf, and I enjoyed the facets of Ruby. I didn't enjoy that having to stop and restart Goshu every time, and that was one thing that I wanted to make sure that feedback loop was really experimental, nice, live. And another facet was that a lot of what I see with Unity, Goshu, Godot, they have very consistent concepts as far as how games be. You have a sprite object, you have a scene hierarchy, you have an ECS domain, and eventing system. And I wanted to say, well, that is a way of thinking about things, but is there a different lens that you can see game dev through, maybe something more data oriented? And that's kind of the shape that DragonRuby took. And given those facets, like the cross-platform aspect to it, and then trying to bend something that already has an opinion to my will, it was just it might as well start from scratch from that perspective.
Right.
Yep.
So what was it about? So DragonRuby is built on MRuby, which one of the things that I think Creston asked me a while ago is, what does MRuby stand for? What's the M for? I have no idea. Yep. What is that for?
Embedded.
Oh, there you go.
Embedded Ruby. Yep.
All right.
And that's exactly it. We need to go cross-platform. So we needed a Ruby runtime and machinery that can be independent and has no assumptions on the OS that it's running on.
Right. All right. Now, so that's all about kind of DragonRuby in a nutshell. I want to learn a little bit about Amir in a nutshell. So were you a game dev that went Ruby or a Ruby dev that went game?
That interesting. I'm a .NET dev that went Ruby and game at the same time. So in 2013, I took a sabbatical, and I picked up I had a PC. I got rid of the PC. Like, I sold everything, got a Mac, instead of a PC, and I'm in Mac OS going, I have no idea what I'm doing. I even had a Windows phone. Like I had the Lumia 880 or whatever, and I was like, I'm gonna get an iPhone. So I started off and I was like, I'm gonna build an iPhone app, and it was Objective C at the time. I and I was it was unfortunate that I didn't appreciate Objective C for the language that it is, coming from C#. But because of that option, I was like, I don't want to build an iOS app in Objective C. It's just painful. And I knew Ruby because I did build automation for .NET projects using Ruby. And there was a software out there called Ruby Motion that allows you to build native iOS apps using Ruby. So I was like, okay, cool. I'm gonna use that and port this game that I found on the internet called A Dark Room into that language. So I emailed Michael, he's the original developer of the game. I said, took a sabbatical, I'm gonna port this into iOS and do my own like adaptation of it and polish it up and kind of make it my own. You wanna go halvesies on it? He's like, yeah, go for it. And so we went halvesies on it, and I built it with Ruby and Ruby Motion and for iOS, and that was my first commercial game.
Nice.
Yep. And I released that. It got like 35 downloads the first day it released, which was great, I guess. After 7 months of work, probably not so great. But then by I think it was like April of 2014, it hit the #1 spot in the App Store. So it went viral for some reason.
Nice.
Hit the #1 spot. It was getting about 20,000 downloads a day for about almost a month. And then after that, it was getting 1,000 downloads. Like the long tail was really good. And I was like, okay, well, I guess I can keep doing this game dev stuff. And so then I made the pre-sequel to Dark Room, built another property. Ended up having to needing to port A Dark Room over to the Nintendo Switch. And that's why I dealt with the problem of like, okay, well, I have this Ruby code base. And I had four games all written in Ruby. I think it's totaled like over 76,000 lines of Ruby at this point.
Thanks.
And yeah, so it's like, how do I continue this without having to, usurp everything and use C or something else? And the answer is apparently, just build a runtime and an engine to continue using the 76,000 lines that we wrote. And I think the engine's at 27,000 lines of C code, and another. We're almost to the 70,000 at this point.
Wow.
But yeah, that's kind of the evolution, where it just happenstance to use Ruby for iOS development because it's a beautiful language, and reached some success. And then it was a question of, well, I don't want to rewrite the code, so how do I adapt and move to these other spectrums? So after the switch happened, because we used MRuby, WebAssembly became a perfect target. And because we used embedded Ruby, you get PC, Mac, and Linux, which no one cared about until the Steam Deck.
Right.
And now everyone cares about Linux. And we just work. We work on Linux. It just worked on there. So it was a good set of small little serendipitous events that led to this.
Yeah. And I was really happy to find this because I've always done my Ruby development in Linux. I prefer a Linux environment to dev in. But if you want to do game dev, you were going to Unity, which is, you're running it in Windows, by golly. Yeah. Pretty much. I mean, there's ways to cheat.
It doesn't work. Don't worry. It doesn't work, and it doesn't work nearly as well in the other platforms. It just doesn't. Yeah. So,
I was really happy to find when I just kind of looked at this game development stuff in Ruby as a lark, and then I found out, about Gosu, and then I started talking to people, and they said, hey, check out DragonRuby, and then I started talking to you. I was like, oh, this is like a dream come true. This is game dev and Ruby in one place. That's
how'd you like the install process?
Yeah, copy a file, loved it.
Unzip, double click,
it's
running.
Yeah,
that's the benefits of the zero dependencies. Yep.
Right. And I actually used, because I already had a project set up and I was getting into Gosu, and then I started talking to you, and you were kind enough to give us a license for the project, and I said, okay, I've got all this structure already here. And I looked at the unzip and I said, I don't want to start a new structure. Can I just port this over? And really, it was copy the executable and make a couple of files in there with a main RB, and off we go. Ta-da! You know, it needed a font directory, I think, and that was it. So it was super easy to get going. And then I just aliased my ZSH so that my RC, so that I could put DR instead of having to type all the /DragonRuby stuff, and you know,
voila. The other interesting thing is that the binary and the runtime are designed to be committed with your source control.
Mm-hmm.
So the biggest reason for that is that they have a shelf life. Like your games have a very large shelf life. So you want to make sure that if you have to update it or like port it for the next version of Nintendo Switch 2, that you're just able to double click exactly the version that you have with all the docs right there, and it'll just work, and it doesn't matter. You don't have to upgrade and pray that nothing breaks. You know exactly what version you're working with, and you can continue to develop, fix a bug, and re-release and things like that. So the binary itself is like, I think it's 8 megabytes on Mac, because we include both the x86 and the M1 architecture in a single binary, but it's about 4.7 megabytes for the entire thing. So you can commit the entire thing to source control.
Yeah, it's really small. I was honestly very impressed with how small that was. Because the whole, I mean, because I guess it's basically a runtime engine.
Yeah.
Right. So getting it that small was, for a game dev engine, was pretty impressive, I thought. So since we're talking about this, I want to take a look at the site. So this is dragonruby.org. If you're interested in learning more about DragonRuby, this is where you want to go. You guys also do Ruby Motion stuff. I don't know anything about that.
Yeah, I ended up acquiring the company.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But,
I used the product, and then I was like, all right, let's acquire it and then continue down this road. Yep.
Yeah. So there's lots of good stuff here. There's also, they recently had the first DragonRuby zine by Brad Chalupa, I think. I really enjoyed this, so if you guys are interested at all in doing DragonRuby, I would highly recommend checking this out. And until the weekend, you said?
Yeah, through the weekend.
Through the weekend, Amir was kind enough to give us a free license, so you guys can go to this address and get a free license of DragonRuby, try it out, play with it yourself, and have your very own DragonRuby license.
Yeah, and there's no limits, no royalties or anything. You can use it for commercial purposes. It's a life. This is perpetually updated. I think we're on 128 updates. Nice round number.
Ooh.
So yeah, we just celebrated our 3-year anniversary, so we've been at it for a while now.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Awesome.
So use it for commercial projects. There's no restrictions.
Right. The other thing that I want to say too is, if you get into DragonRuby, make very, very sure that you go hang out on their Discord. It is one of, by far, the best Discord communities I've ever been involved in. I got, when we started this project, I wanted to have noise maps and stuff, and there was no Perlin noise implementation in DragonRuby that I could find. So I started asking about it, and a couple of people on the thing said, hey, let's just do it. So I got to work with some folks on there and gen up a Perlin noise library for DragonRuby. I think Levi, you were one of the ones that was helping us with that in the chat. So he was doing a lot of the performance optimizations and teaching me a lot about when you're doing game dev, you have to think a lot more about performance than if you're doing web dev. Yes. So here's some tricks.
You have 16 milliseconds. Good luck.
Yeah.
That's how much of a time slice you have. But yeah, it's
right. So
it can be a challenge at times.
Yeah, it's an interesting learning thing. And D did a lot of the legwork. And I just I was mostly in there to gripe and complain and do
Kick the tires.
yeah,
right?
and
Kick the
did a
tires on
little
it,
bit
yeah.
of organization things for how I wanted it running in my project, but it was a really good experience to be in that community. So if you're going to do game dev of any kind, but in particular DragonRuby, I would get involved in that Discord community. They're fabulous people over there, and they've been super helpful.
They're awesome. They really
yeah.
are.
I've
really great.
really enjoyed it. And in fact, you know, I posted about this show an hour ago, and they were like, "Hey, put this up in the main chat and stuff." So they're all on board with community stuff, which is great. So the DragonRuby really is geared towards 2D game development, right? Is that a function of the Ruby language itself? Because what you've always heard about Ruby is, oh, you can't do game development in it because it's an interpreted language, so it's too slow to do. Yeah. Or is the kind of 2D focus more to do with how you're structuring the interpreter and the embedded Ruby and stuff?
That's a good question. For me, honestly, it started off 2D because that's what I have the most experience with, right? I think I've been game dev for nine years, going on to 10 years now, and you gain a lot of battle scars. You know what works, what doesn't, the good and the bad of everything out there. And I knew the 2D domain really well. And Ryan Gordon, he's another partner. He's one of the core contributors on libstdl, which is our primary dependency and how we interop with like OS level things. And STL is effectively a 2D machinery too. So we kind of went 2D makes sense from an experience standpoint. With targeting indies and potentially smaller teams, 2D is more approachable, and that's kind of why we're at 2D. And in that same regard, the interest in 3D is what makes me go, I want to do 3D now, because I got the Oculus and I'm like, this thing is awesome, and it's like I want to build a game for this thing, however stupid. I'm going to figure it out. And so then that's what's pushing the envelope to get it into the 3D realm. And then Alex Anisov, he's incredibly like just driven and passionate about LLVM and the compiler toolchain, which is it pretty much everything pretty much compiles using Clang. You know, Chrome uses Clang. I think a lot of the Windows, a lot of their baseline compilers are starting to move over to Clang instead of VS, Visual Studio C++. So there's a significant investment that we're making in having that expertise inside of DragonRuby. So the evolution of Ruby is we're trying to evolve Ruby to be an AOT compiled binary, and the premise around that is to use Clang and its capabilities to make it, to take Ruby to that next level. And with respect to performance, Ruby is a language. A runtime is an implementation of that language. So an example is like you've got a .NET Core, which is C#, and you have Unity, and there's a Sharp.js back from 2011. Which one do you think they have the same execution profile? No way. One of them's written in JavaScript. Like it's gonna be way slower than the .NET Core, which is highly optimized and built on top of LLVM, and Unity is in the middle, which is built on Mono. So their runtime's a little different. So when we talk about Ruby, is Ruby slow? Well, it depends on the runtime, and we want to tune DragonRuby and that specific runtime to be performant for games, and by extension, it'll be performant for other things. We can already render more sprites on the screen than Unity, and our many-to-many collision detection is, I think, 200 to 300 times faster than Unity. We can do 1,500 sprites on my machine at 45 FPS. You get one in Unity, so that's not great. But it's a combination of framework, runtime, optimization, being against the metal. But we are up there with regards to performance. Nowhere near as fast as Lua, but yeah, we're up there.
Yeah, but can
Lua
anybody?
NC is
Yeah,
Lua
I mean,
NC. It's like it's tough.
that's a high bar.
It's a high bar.
But to be fair, how often do you need to be that fast? I mean, unless you're doing, you know, unless you're making Assassin's Creed in 4K,
exactly.
You know, you can get away with some cheats on the lower end of that.
And we have the escape hatch. You can always make a C extension. It's the higher license tiers, but if you need that against the metal performance, you can make a C extension for those things. But I want to make a VR game. I'm going to make a VR game. It's going to happen, and so that will continue to push the envelope of what we can do.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about MRuby, because it's, you know, as I'm developing live, there's some subtle differences between, you know, RegulaRuby and MRuby, and they can get a little goofy. I got a little frustrated Tuesday
There's
because
subtle nuances.
because I was used to doing things a certain way in Ruby, and I did it, and I was running the RSpec, and it was all working in RSpec, and then I ran the DR, and it blew up, and I was like, what the hell?
What's going on?
And it turns out that, you know, in this case, it was a simple thing of MRuby doesn't support delegate like Ruby does. At least not the syntax I'm used to. Whether it does or not, I'm not sure. But so what are, if somebody's coming to Ruby and they want to try this out, what are some things that you can tell them about MRuby, or some places that they can go and see? All right, you're going to have to make these kind of adjustments when you're coding in DragonRuby.
Yeah. So as far as MRuby, we are ISO compliant with the MRuby spec. We just build on top of that. So there is mruby.org, and then there's dedicated documentation for MRuby and the core libraries, the core libs that are in there. So you can use that mostly. Anything that's iOS or OS specific, like, or dealing with IO, like file reading, network, at that point you want to defer to the DragonRuby documentation. And to your point, most of the time it works. Most of the time Ruby and MRuby work, but there are like really subtle API differences. Like I think Rand doesn't, in MRuby doesn't take a range for maximum minimum values. So if you might be doing like Rand 1.10 in Ruby, but you come over to MRuby and it explodes, and you're just like, great, how do I do this? And for those facets, those incompatibilities will be there. Usually it's easy to like redefine the function and add that capability. If I hear it enough and I hear enough feedback, like we really need this, then I think about, okay, how can we bring it into the runtime, and not just a simple workaround patch, but something that's native to at the C layer. And that's kind of the facets and evolution that you're kind of dealing with. With respect to like testing and things like that, it's testing video games is very different, primarily because you're testing something that's running at 60 frames a second. So how do you test a video game? So there's something in DragonRuby is called it actually has replay capability. I don't know if you've seen that, but you can actually have a replay and then run the replay, and it seeds with a very specific RNG also. So if you have an RNG generated map suddenly and you want to try to do a playthrough of it, you've got to replay a reliable way to follow through the same map. And we have a lightweight testing layer. It's kind of more of like a mini test where it's just convention based, and that stuff is open source, so we can kind of work on it and expand on it together. I think that's part of the community, is that you get the feedback that your testing thing is not that great. So, okay, well, what are you looking for? How can we make it better? Here's the touch points if you want to try to kick the tires on or work on it. We've got to-dos on our list, but that's kind of how we're trying to compensate. And the Discord community is that central hub where you get that kind of interaction.
Yeah. And you know, I fully accept the fact that I'm trying to do something strange. I guess I'm a masochist or something, because I'm wanting to do RSpec because I'm an RSpec lover, and DragonRuby and get those things to coexist. And the way I'm doing it is I'm RSpecing my classes, my logic stuff, and I'm leaving the rendering and gameplay stuff in a different area. So
I'll post a link. This one, we've got a one of our community members did a roguelike tutorial, completely unit tested, non-trivial amount of code. You might want to take a look at that tutorial and look at that repo and just get a feel for how Chris ended up using the testing facilities in DragonRuby.
Cool.
Yeah, might give you some inspiration, but I posted a link there.
Awesome. Yeah, and there's and this is an example of something that I really love about this community in the Discord is that people are like, you go in and ask a question and you immediately get like 5 or 6 people saying, here's what I think, here's how you do it, here's a link to this thing, and that's really helpful. Because it is, it's a bit of a subtle difference, and it's a different way of thinking about coding when you're coming from a web development mindset to a game development mindset.
Yeah, it's artistic, right? There's no hard, fast rules. So it's like, this kind of work for me, this kind,
And the coding patterns are different too, because in web dev, I mean, you want it to be performant, but you don't have to think as much about performance as you do when you switch over to game dev. And so you end up with, I could refactor this, but that's a problem in the game dev, right? So readability sometimes has to take kind of a back seat to performance there, which is an interesting thing that I'm learning. And
there's some like really weird complexities or insights that you get with long running state, because in web dev you have a controller, it's initialized, runs through it, and then your view has like member variables or ivars that you can render to in an ERB file, and that's fine. But in game dev, you got this long running process, and you're like, I have a bug, but the root of the bug might have happened 300 frames earlier, and it's a different way of reasoning about a system. And long running state is one of those things, and it's got to be persisted, like if you want to save a game. So how do you work in an environment that's artistic, has long running state that requires persistence and must be fast? It's just a different animal.
Yeah, and there was a good example of that came up in my stuff, and I had to ask about it in Discord because I was very confused because of the mindset of that, request response cycle that I'm used to. And that is, I do a tick 0 setup for my stuff, which is generating some Perlin noise maps and right now putting solids in, but we'll convert it to sprites at some point, but for visualization. And, I'm putting like 200,000+ cells, solids up in the screen, and it worked really well, but then it's just sitting there. So it's not doing anything. And I started getting these messages about, hey, your frame rate is dropping. But, it's like 5-10 seconds after this thing is rendered. And I'm like, why am I getting this now? I'm not doing anything, but it's because it's not just that instant request response cycle. There's more stuff happening. And, that was a big learning for me, because that's not the way my brain is used to thinking about Ruby code.
Yeah, and it's fibers are a really interesting facet that I've yet to explore. But because with respect to performance, you're always going to hit a limit. Like, I don't care how fast your engine is. Loading an Assassin's Creed map in a 1-to-1 scale of Paris is going to take longer than 16 milliseconds. So you have to think about how do I partition and make it responsive throughout this loading process or throughout the game dev process. It's a different way of thinking about things. And with fibers and the ability to like put it to sleep and do a little bit of the work, and then on the next frame pick it back up and do a little bit more work, you start thinking about, well, how can I spread the 200,000 values of compute over multiple frames and progressively enhance and all those kind of things. But it's just a different way of thinking.
Yeah. And I was, on that same topic, I was really impressed because when I started this project and I'm thinking about, all the stuff I've heard about Ruby and interpreted languages, and you just can't do game dev because they're too slow. So I said, okay, well, let me push it with with a pretty expensive computational thing, which is generating large Perlin noise maps. actually 3 of them, and add them
That's a lot.
together. And yeah. So
Holy crap.
yeah. And what it turns out is that I can do that in DragonRuby it takes, I don't know, 8 seconds ish. I was really impressed with that because that's a tremendous amount of stuff that I'm doing. And not only is it just computing the maps, the values, but it's actually creating all the solids and rendering them to the screen in that amount of time. So that's, that's performant. That's not sluggish. That's not, hey, you can't do Ruby because it's interpreted language, right? Yeah. So
we outperform Unity. Like we're rendering more sprites and we're handling collisions faster than Unity does. And I'm sure there's places where Unity beats us out. But the fact that we can even say that we can do 2x sprites and 300 times the collisions, like, that in itself is an accomplishment. So I don't have a worry with that stuff anymore. I just use it and it works and it's great.
Yeah. So, and there's, there's lots of things to learn about how to do game dev, but I don't think the things I'm learning are specifically Ruby-esque things. They're game dev idioms that you have to understand, right?
Yeah.
So do you think, I know you guys behind the scenes are kind of working on the VR stuff now, and poking around with the 3D and the VR, which is really cool. I'm excited to see that. But do you think that Ruby could have a future in like a AAA game scenario? Could it do an Assassin's Creed thing or something like that?
I think for 3D games, specifically like desktop-based 3D games and console, going up against Unity is something that is doable. Going against Unreal is a whole different story, because their stuff actually works. Like it's legitimately, they eat their own dog food. I mean, you got Final Fantasy VII Remake built in that. You've got what's the game? I can't believe I forgot the name of the game. Fortnite. Mm-hmm. Epic is using their own system to build games, and it's impressive. It's just incredibly impressive. So saying that we can take that on is probably a fool's errand, generally speaking.
Right.
What I want to see happen is especially for VR and 3D, is to lower the barrier to entry. Because when we were kids, we saw a text-based game like Zork, and it's like, I can write stuff to a screen.
Yeah,
I can totally do that. And then you get into game dev, but kids these days, they see a 3D game and they're like, I have no idea where to even begin. Like,
right.
How do you even address that? So I think lowering that barrier and providing a means for someone to say, I know how to render a sprite in 2D world, and I can do it in 3D by providing a Z index. So I give it an X, Y, and Z, and suddenly the sprite is popping out. Mm-hmm. And now I can rotate a sprite in the Z direction. So now I have a cube. Oh wait, there's a concept called a 3D model that represents this cube that I'm drawing manually, and those kind of points of connectivity kind of exist there. So that's our primary goal with respect to 3D and VR experiences, to create those fun environments, and then let people's imaginations and the collaboration we have with them figure out where that goes.
Awesome. Well,
that's the best thing you say, right?
Yeah, I'm really happy to hear you say that, honestly, because I'm big about educating people with development and passing on the knowledge that we have and bringing up junior developers to do cool things and keep this going. So, and I like the way that you guys have structured DragonRuby to, while you're trying to, you charge for the license, and it's really inexpensive, I think. Because you got to keep the lights on, but you've also been very generous where you've seen opportunities to allow people to teach with it or bring excitement with it and hopefully bring new devs in. So I'm really happy to have gotten involved with a company that does that kind of thinking. Because that's the whole reason I'm doing the live coding stuff is to have a repo where junior devs can practice doing PRs or playing with stuff and, trying, learning how to communicate and do OSS and stuff. So do you guys have, what do you do besides the Discord, which is obviously a great learning place? Do you do things where you purposefully try to teach game development to people?
I think there have been a few. I've done some like local workshops just in my local academic communities, and I do capstone projects with local university to help with that facet to it. It is a bit more challenging to reach scale. That's always the tricky part. And the other thing is that there's this like sweet spot where a kid is old enough to learn and retain some of the complexities of programming, but they're not too old to where being a teenager and being in high school and all those things and having those courses available to you in high school end up replacing what that experimentation and point in time. So you've got maybe from year 8 to year 13 to kind of capture and get that magic. And it's hard for me. I haven't found a real good way to really laser focus into that at scale.
Yeah.
So that's been a challenge, and that's one of the reasons why we say, like, if you're a parent that's teaching your kids, you got 10 kids, I'll give you 11 licenses or 12 licenses if you need them. Just help, right? Help with that that expansion. And I think other people in the community are doing like all the books and the DragonRuby zines that's out, and everyone tries to approach it based on their learning style and then seeing how that can be applied and given to other people. But yeah, we're figuring it out, and it's people that care that kind of push those initiatives, and I'll support them as best I can. That's what I try to do.
Yeah, and I will say that it's been really a joy for me talking to you behind the scenes and getting the help from you and saying, hey, sure, take a license and help, use that to teach. And it was really nice to have that kind of support from somebody who's making a living doing this, right?
Yeah, operating in good faith. And that's why I said, go in and put the binary in your project. People can clone it and they can run it. It's fine. It's okay. Yep.
Yeah, and that's much appreciated, and I'm really looking forward to doing some more stuff. Maybe I can get you to come on to Coding with Chris sometime and help me play around with the DragonRuby and do some pairing there.
Yeah.
That would be really fun. Get some actual hands-on keyboard kind of stuff.
Have you gone through like a release process, like actually doing a publish of your game or anything yet?
No, it's well, I wouldn't call it a game yet. It's generating a Perlin noise map at this point. It's very early on, so there's not much to publish. Though I would like to at some point look at that process and learn that process.
What's kind of your goal? Like, what's your, if everything goes perfect, what does that end state look like to you?
Well, the kind of the game I have in mind is kind of a RimWorld-esque top-down colony sim, lots of logic stuff, in like a fantasy environment. But the purpose of this thing is not to make a game. It's to have a community place for people to learn and practice with OSS and Ruby dev and game dev and a place to just play with that stuff and practice PRs. And so that's really the purpose of
it's something that's not boring, right? It's Please send me a PR for this RuboCop fix in this unit test. It's like, I guess I can do that, but
yeah,
can I build a game instead?
Right.
I get it.
I'd much rather figure out, how to put a sprite on the screen for you.
Yeah.
And make something that looks cool. So yeah, DragonRuby was a great fit for me because it was easy to implement. I can give it to the people that are cloning this down to play with it, and they don't have to do a bunch of setup and crap, which was fantastic. Yeah,
that's a big hurdle. We don't realize how used to it we are. well, you just install Docker, set this file, do this curl command, and you're up. And it's like, what? What happened?
Right. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, at work, I'm 18 months into this job, and I still yesterday was setting up some stuff on my dev environment to get a certain deploy to work, and then I had to go through an
Or
hour
trying to
worth
get
of
NVM
setup.
working
Right.
with
Yeah.
Astive. Like,
Right.
this stuff's supposed to make it easier, and it doesn't work.
Right. Just let me clone the repo and hit the go button. Come
Please.
on.
Yes. No, I totally get it. I totally get it. But yeah, I think it's good. It's good, and I try to be in good faith, right? And it, for some reason, it's really easy to do with Ruby devs. I think like Mina Swan and some of that facet just is intrinsic in the community, and it's just nice.
Yeah, that is something I've found in the Ruby community because I got into Ruby when Rails like 2.0 was coming out, and the Ruby community has always been just extraordinarily gracious, and friendly and welcoming. There are other dev communities that are very not that, and Ruby was very refreshing like that, and it has never changed. I mean, it's still that way.
And I think one thing I do, a personal goal of mine is that, I mean, Ruby's been around for a while, like CRuby, especially 26, 27 years at this point. And we've kind of settled into a state of comfort and maturity, right? It's a really mature language, specifically like Ruby on Rails. There's specific ways to do things, and you get that maturity and wisdom, which provides high quality craftsmanship of software, but you lose the innovation, right? If you don't do it this way, then you're doing it wrong, and it doesn't let you have the opportunity to experiment. So I think Ruby, faster Ruby is the graciousness of the community. I think another thing is the what's it called, the innovation, right? When Rails came out, it was the innovation, and we're kind of stiffening in the innovation realm. So I'm like, DragonRuby is going to help you break out of that. You can have fun, you can make mistakes, because it's a game. It's not some system that is gonna, if it goes down, cost $1 million. Just break things, do it a different way, and have fun. Bring that innovation back.
Right.
So that's another big goal that I have with the engine.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Because I'm finding that with the stuff I'm doing, I get to keep telling people, look, if you put a PR in that just completely bombs this whole thing, nobody cares. It just doesn't matter. So try something.
Yeah.
Nobody's gonna die, and I'm not gonna lose any money. So because I'm not making any money on it. So what you can't hurt it. Go. So I'm really excited about the future for DragonRuby here. I think it seems to me like it's picking up a lot of traction, especially in the past year or so. So I'm hoping to keep going with it. I will say, chat, if you're out there and you're not already in the DragonRuby Discord, even if you're not planning on making games for a living, I would highly recommend getting into that Discord, because the general amount of programming knowledge that's in there is insane.
Yeah, we've got very seasoned Ruby devs, and I'd bet you anything that if you're part of the Discord and you start contributing, getting those belt ranks, having that little thing in there, if a job opens up and they're like, hey, we need someone at the intro level, it's fine. These are the connections that help you get into a specific role, so much more than a resume. And I think just being around people, you never know who ends up being in those rooms, and there's a lot of talent in there.
Yeah,
exceptional amount of Ruby experience in there. Yep.
And I mean, you could pick up your dream job of, hey, I get to develop games in Ruby for a living.
Make that studio. The big studio that's going to do the game dev will come from this Discord, and yeah, you're part of it. It's a good thing.
Yep. So, all right. Well, we're running up on time here, and I got
a question.
Oh, go,
questions.
Man.
Questions.
So, a little bit back, I didn't want to derail a conversation. You were talking about fibers, and one thing with regard to Ruby 3, when it was released, one of the things that I found even more interesting than fibers were ractors
hmm
and how highly concurrent they are compared to everything else that I was looking at. And when I was testing stuff, I was like, holy crackerjack, it can scale linearly with CPU cores using ractors. So I guess my question is, how closely do you follow the performance things that are being done in Ruby? And then how fast does MRuby follow things that are happening in, I don't know if you want to call it mainline Ruby or core Ruby?
Yeah, CRuby. Yep.
Okay.
And
So yeah, so how does that work? Like, so they're doing some things there. How does that filter down to MRuby? How do you choose to implement things or not in different ways in DragonRuby?
yep. And I think the relationship with CRuby and MRuby, it does lag behind CRuby.
Yeah, of
So
course. Yeah.
example is like MRuby still doesn't have the tokenized hashes where you can implicitly, instead of saying A:A with the variable named the letter A, you still have to type it out. But in CRuby, you can just put A and it creates the hash for you. Single line functions aren't there. I think some of the pattern matching facilities aren't there. So those like language specific features are gonna generally lag behind, and it's one of those things where I have pattern matching is okay, but it doesn't feel like a killer feature where I'm like I'm going to contribute a PR to fix that. But that ends up being an option. Is that the more people that are using MRuby, just through DragonRuby, are positioning themselves to potentially contribute to MRuby upstream. Are we there yet? No, we're not. But that lag exists, and it's a necessary situation given the trade-offs. With respect to concurrency and Ractor, this is the tricky part when it comes to runtimes, is that our execution runtime is different than CRuby's. So what we have is essentially a message pump, and you get a time slice of 16 milliseconds to do whatever you want to do. So the way our threading model works, and we use it for our HTTP requests, is that you issue an async request, and then you can check for completion on the re-entrance of your next thread. So tick happens again. You say, "Is the response finished?" No. Okay. Well, I'm gonna have to wait another thing, and that's kind of our it's polling essentially, right? Our concurrency model is effectively polling, and that's where it gets tricky with working with concurrency models like Ractor. And with that time slice, it again is tricky. You've got cores, but console cores are different than PC cores, and then you've got the low power CPUs, and it gets frustrating from that perspective. Yeah. So the concurrency models, we have a good concurrency model for HTTP. Your rendering happens on a separate thread, so we have a dedicated thread for rendering to get as high as an FPS as you can, and then your simulation loop is executed on another thread at 60 hertz. So we as best as we can, we guarantee that you're going to get 60 times a second, unless you're rendering 200,000 Perlin noise things in one frame. That gets tricky. But our idea around concurrency is because MRuby is so light, taking more of an Erlang approach, and I think you'd appreciate this, is that we can spin up an instance of that, another instance at runtime to act as like a worker. It could execute a function, have its own tick, and then return the result as like a persistent hash back to the supervisor or parent or what have you.
Right.
Yeah. So because the runtime's so lightweight, we have an option of potentially having these like tiny concurrent workers that roll back up to a top level. We're just not there yet, and we're still exploring what that looks like.
Okay. All right.
So what do you think about that? It's like a happy accident, right? MRuby's so light, we could use it like this. You can spin up the entire runtime, and it's totally fine. Execute something and tear it down.
It's
yeah.
Really cool.
Well, I mean, I really like the actor model of concurrency that like Elixir and Erlang use. For me, like I briefly looked into threading with regard to Ruby or other languages, and I'm like, I don't want to touch this with a 10-foot pole.
Yeah, async await is difficult. Callbacks are
whereas
tough. It's just
the actor model of concurrency that Elixir and Erlang has is like, oh, this makes sense. Or I mean, and it's much easier for my mind to get grasp and actually use compared to so many of the other concurrent language structures I've worked with before. So
Yeah, and the really cool thing is that because the way the tick function works, we know when all the runtimes have shut down effectively, right? If you're not in that time slash, we know you're not running, and that effectively makes us thread safe because there's no chance of something mutating the state while we're sharing or copying things over. So it kind of, it's nice. It's nice that we can guarantee that this is a point of snapshot where we could potentially persist, roll back, share state, and then bring everyone back up again to operate on that new state. Chris had a mind blown. He's like, "Whoa, wait, hold on."
So, are you saying that you basically can't have race conditions or thread collisions if doing it that way?
We have a synchronization point that can avoid those kind of problems. Yep, because all the virtual, when you exit tick, we could potentially say, well, we do it for a hot load. That's how hot load kind of works right now. Because we save the GC arena, and then append that state, and it's available to you. It's yeah.
Because that, the race conditions and the thread collisions is always why in the .NET world, you just, every time you heard the word thread, you died a little inside.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard to reason about. It's really tough. Yeah.
So that's interesting to hear that this, especially as fast as this is running behind the scenes, can do that kind of collision avoidance. And I'm kind of interested to think that through some more and see what would happen, how I could utilize that, generating 3 different Perlin maps at the same time. And
yeah, so we don't expose that concurrency model yet. It's baked into our HTTP layer.
Right.
You do have fibers, but if you keep your fibers separate and kind of treat each one of them as kind of like a call function, a command function or actor that has its own tick, then you've positioned yourself to say these could all operate on these separate areas, and then your parent tick function could see, are my threads finished? Are my child state objects finished?
See, now that's fun.
Yeah. It's the innovation, right? It's the things where you just, we're not there yet, but it's exciting.
Yeah. Well, and you got, when you're, depending on the type of game you build, that becomes important, because if you're doing something where you've got a bunch of little autonomous pawns running around doing different things and they've got states, and you've got, let's say, 20 of them, that's hard to get everything done in one tick.
It will always be hard.
Yeah.
So always think about that. It will always be hard, unfortunately. And if you want determinism, you got to get that right.
Yeah. But if you can
That's
separate,
a trade-off, right?
Yeah, but if you can separate those people into different threads and they're each running their own lane of the highway as they go, that
it can help.
That's a big thing. But anyway, thank you so much, Amir. I've enjoyed the hell out of this, and I've got a million other questions, but you guys go hang out in the Discord, because I'm sure I'll be asking them in there.
And let me know on the Tuesday when you want to hack together, and I'm down. And we can do another sale during that time too.
I absolutely will reach out to you for that. And speaking of which, there's the link again if you guys want to get a free copy of the DragonRuby engine. You go to this, download it through the weekend. It's free through the generosity of DragonRuby and Amir, and we hope you'll join us. Please make sure to come join me on Tuesdays at 3 p.m. for Coding with Chris, where I play with this stuff live and end up looking like an idiot most of the time, but that's cool. That's what I'm there for.
It's okay. I still roll my head on my keyboard. I've given up trying to look smart. Like, I'm an idiot. I just keep going. That's it.
Yeah. It's some days I wonder why I'm a programmer. But next week, next Thursday, we've got Schwad coming to talk to us about hobby programming. What do you do on the side when you're not making the money with it? How do you make that fun? So that's next week's guest. Amir, thank you again for coming and joining us. We really appreciate the work that you've done on DragonRuby. I certainly do. It's a fun thing, and it's really kind of reinvigorating my love for programming.
Yeah, you feel the magic again.
Yeah,
which is important for seasoned devs. Yeah,
for sure. But we will see you guys Tuesday. I will see you Tuesday. We will see you again here next Thursday, 3 p.m. Eastern time on both days. Twitch or YouTube, you pick your poison. If you enjoyed this, please like, follow, subscribe. All those things are free. That makes us feel all loved. So, you know, you'd be doing us a huge favor and putting smiles on our faces. We will see you next time. And until then, happy programming.
Happy programming.